All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Hisham, and of course, the obvious thing to say is that like Christine's a tough act to follow, like after all that energy. And but yeah, I think we're gonna wind things down a bit and get a bit philosophical about free software maintainership, project directions, and all those kinds of things. So I think it's gonna be pretty chill. And yeah. So as many of you know, and I see many friends here, I have started several. This is feeding back a little, but I hope it's okay in the recording. I have started several free software projects myself, and I guess maybe one of the takeaways of this talk, probably of all my talks, is to try to encourage people to start their own little projects. Like, I love big visions and I love big communities, but personally, my thing has always been like starting little projects, and I've done a few of them, and with varied outcomes. And some of you has mentioned before, like I think like the most popular one is HTOP, the process viewer, which I've worked on for about like 15 years or something. And yeah, and that got like, that got really big and popular. And another one which found its niche is Lua Rocks, the package manager for the Lua programming language. So that also started as a small project and ended up getting like lots of usage, at least like within the small universe that is the Lua world and its various subcommunities. But then again, I also made like my own little text editor, which I use as my daily driver, and which I have like basically like one user, and I get surprised when someone sends an email or something, and I don't expect anyone else to use it. And yeah, so here when we talk about minimalism, and many of the talks that we see here, we often talk about small projects, and like it's fair to see those things as small projects as well. And when we look at the history of how it went, like many people know the story. Like I have maintained HTOP for like about 15 years, and if you look at the commit graph history and my commit graph history over there, like I'm happy to report that I have been since overtaken in the number of commits, like by one of the current maintainers. But basically, like up to like the first 3/4 of the graph, they pretty much like match my graph there, and then we have this like flurry of activity now that there's a new maintainer team carrying on with the project. So I'm super happy about that outcome over there. And I can tell you, like at that point, somewhere around there, after the last big burst that I did, at one point, like I was happy with HTOP. It did everything I needed. The whole scratch your own itch thing was done, and I honestly felt like the project was finished, and really, like I pretty much lost interest in it. Right. So I'm happy there's people who are interested. I've just met here at FOSS Ben, one of the current maintainers, like Ben B here. For the first time in person, and it's been an awesome experience. Like on the other hand, like the little text editor, keeps going. Like they're not up to the same scale, but like it just keeps going. Like if I need something, I made a little change, and it just keeps going as my own little project, right? Which brings me to my current like focus of excitement, my current little project, which is Teal. Teal is you can think of Teal as what TypeScript is to JavaScript. So basically, like Teal is a pun on TL. Like those of you who were at the 2019 FOSS talk when it still didn't have a name, the working title for the project was TL, and I kept calling it Teal, and then it's like, and I like the color. So, and just like, so yeah, that was 2019 me talking about it, and so this is like a typed dialect of Lua, and Lua. Sometimes I forget to talk about Lua and to give a little primer. Right? Lua is this dynamic language which was developed in Brazil at the PUC-Rio University at Rio de Janeiro, and in the 90s. At one point in the 2000s, when I was like thinking of applying to grad school, Lua was the only programming language like that reached the mainstream that was not developed in the global north. Right. So actually, it was like one of the two only ones that were not from Western Europe or the United States. because the other exception was Ruby from Japan. And so it's this scripting language that's super small. It's designed to be embeddable, so it found niches in networking areas, ended up working with it a lot in that field. Gaming industry mainly, and embedded systems. And to put a human face to it, here's a picture from, I think it was last year, like when we celebrated like 30 years of Lua. That was, they held a workshop in Rio de Janeiro. Like, that's me next to Roberto, creator of the language. There's Hugo, who's creator of Paline, and like many other like of the alumni and the next generation, like the current undergrads in Rio, and the project keeps going on. And so the idea of Teal was kind of like Lua, but for programming in the large, because Lua is designed as this tiny, and we're talking about minimalism here, it was designed as this tiny minimalist language, but that doesn't stop people from misusing it. Like, people end up like, oh, I like Lua, it's so tiny, let me start writing more and more and more and more and more stuff with it. So in the end, people end up writing like entire applications, such as Lua Rocks, which was not the right way to do it, because like in the end, like it becomes kind of unwieldy, right? And being like a PL nerd, like instead of like rewriting it in a better choice of language, no, let's make another language too, so we can still keep writing it in Lua, but now with type safety. So this is not really a coding talk, but just so I have like one slide with code, here's like a quick taste of Teal. It really looks like Lua, but then like the teal colored bits are like the type annotations. We have like new operator here and there and things to deal with types. And this is a bit of foreshadowing on like some of the things I'm going to talk about for like Teal's raison d'être, right? So Teal has evolved over the years. Like, it started from that little personal project that I presented in 2019, and now it has users, it has people who complain about it, it has people who send bug reports saying that the compiler is too slow and they're compiling hundreds of files at the time, and I go like, oh my god, you have a Teal project that has hundreds of files, right? Well, so basically I'm not the largest Teal user anymore, like by far, right? So we do have a community that has evolved around it. And I talked about it last year here, like in a presentation called like 5 years of Teal, and an interesting thing was like this, thing of like minimalism versus growth, like this challenge that was already in place, right? And I talked about things of language design, and I talked about how people wanted safety, and to keep it in the minimalistic type thing, I thought like, okay, how about instead of nil safety, we give them like functionality checks that would take them like a good deal of the way there, right? And then I talked about how people wanted objects, people doing games, they love modeling their objects in the game world and using object orientation. And instead of like giving a full-blown class system, I was like, okay, how about I give you interfaces with subtyping, right? So the whole thing of the talk was how I was working on designing alternative solutions that would try to keep the minimalism of the language, right? And that's what I did. Teal 24 was released in October 2024, and it did include all those things, right? So it did include linearity checks, which was essentially now you don't have like optional types, but you have optional arguments, right? So that things that used to be valid, such as like passing not enough arguments because nil is an implied zero type, zero object in every type. This used to be valid, but it now fails. So it did give people more safety, right? And arity checks were a success, because if you think back to it, like this is something that was a valid thing that used to be accepted by the language, and sometimes it's what people actually wanted for it to be accepted. So this was effectively a breaking change, and I was super scared of making a breaking change that was like, okay, people now update their compiler, and now their old code no longer compiles. How are they going to react to that, right? So it took some talking to the community and reviewing what would be the alternatives to dealing with that. So we eventually set up like a system with like there's a pragma that you can put in the code for enabling or disabling RIT checks, so that like if you're requiring some other library that hasn't been converted to the Neal style yet, you can temporarily disable it, or if your entire project hasn't been converted yet, you can pass it like as a command line flag. Like I made it very like optional, but I turned it on by default. Like this is the new way the language works, right? And I'm saying this was a success because the feedback I got out of that after I put it out in the world and close my eyes and say, okay, I'm breaking people's code now, what's going to happen? Radio silence. Like, nobody talked about the arity checks feature since it was out. Like, except for maybe one or two people in the chat saying, whoa, it caught some bugs that I had. Like, now I fixed them, I put the question marks in, and like, I got like a little bits and pieces of positive feedback, but apart from that, it was like silence. And I did mention that in last year's talk about how like in open source, almost all of the feedback that you get is negative feedback. You have to come to conferences to meet people, and people say, hey, I love your work, right? But people don't do it online. Like people are not gonna email thank you. Yeah, right? So you have to, so one small takeaway, like take silence as a, right, you're doing good. And then I added the interfaces thing, right? So the interfaces thing allowed you to do things that you couldn't before, such as making unions of different table types, and so that you could use the new is operator for discriminating those unions. And I added like a mini macro system that could tell the compiler how to expand those is checks. And across interfaces, we could have subtyping. So this was a big undertaking because Teal also already had generics, and how those things interacted was a big can of worms. Like most of my work that last year on Teal went on this, right? So and then this was like an entirely new feature, which was like entirely optional. You could just never put an interface and just continue using records, just not use this, not use this, not use that, and continue using Teal as always. Right, and ignore this feature entirely, right? Unlike arity checks, which were a breaking change that I imposed on everyone. And interfaces, I guess, were a success because I got the other type of feedback. I got a ton of bug reports. Like I got lots of negative feedback on interfaces, but it was not negative feedback of the kind, oh, this feature sucks. No, it was, I like the feature, I tried to use it, and this part doesn't work. Or I tried this like weird combination and it failed. Like all of those other cases that I haven't checked, right? Yeah, so like this is like a filter of the issues list, like bugs, and all of the things when people started like trying out interfaces. So yeah, so like, after that we worked on it like 24.0, 24.1, 0.2, 0.3, and we worked out on the issues. Like all of these issues are closed now. And but the interesting thing was that the feedback was not only about bugs. The feedback was also about like I'm trying to use the feature, but it feels weird. Like I'm failing to achieve what I'm trying to achieve with it. And yeah, because and then again, like another thing is that like not all of the issues here are red. Some of them are like yellow, have the yellow tab, which is like semantics. It's like people asking questions. I'm trying to do this, but it doesn't work. And then I have a reply saying, yes, it doesn't work because semantic reason X, Y, Z. And they go, okay, so I'm going to try something else, right? And then, okay, that doesn't work either. Or oh, yeah, thanks, that worked. And then they close the issue, right? So there were some back and forth that I did not classify as bugs, but I was like figuring out how to use this in real life. So, but then especially given those like yellow ones, like the conclusion was that, okay, it was a good idea to introduce this, but it's sufficient, right? They did not address like what people were really asking for, right? So Lua, one of the ways that Lua is so minimalistic and one of the sources of its success is this motto, like mechanisms, not policies, right? People, so basically the thing that I was trying to do in which like people ask for features and instead of that they add features, then allow you to build the feature yourself, right? And that's like, it's very influenced. In spite of not having like the parentheses and not looking like it, like Lua is very influenced by Scheme, like Roberto himself has said that. So this whole thing about like giving the developer the tools for them to develop the features that they want. But when I tried to do that with interfaces, I started getting some like feedback and like people starting to do this like child class new instance of the parent class is this and that with super with this and that, and getting to the conclusion like, okay, the compiler does not type this, does not accept this, and they go like, is there a way to type this correctly? Do I have to do inheritance Rust style? Right? Because I was giving them like something that kind of looked like traits, really, right? And Rust has this way of like going, no, don't do like Java style OOP, like do this other thing, right? And I'm featuring Pierre here in my slides because like there's one comment of him saying like, yeah, like reading the conversation, I thought the same. The doc says that interface can be used with object libraries, but do not demonstrate how, right? Because and then like this same user also tried something else, and they go like polymorphism could also work, although I value my sanity, right? They were going crazy trying to fix their problems, like trying really hard to use interfaces. They were really giving it a shot, right? But they were hitting like difficulties there. And I think Pierre touched on an important point here, because when I released this, I think I oversold the feature by saying like, oh, you see there's all those Lua object models that are out there, now you can use them, because I thought that, okay, by putting like, I'm going back, like by putting this little macro system that could just fit to whatever kind of object class differentiation you could use, like in different style, like, okay, one is an attribute, one is a method. Here you could like macro your way into accepting all of that. I thought that would be sufficient. But what I was really thinking was, the existing object models done in Lua, such as like the Love2D object model and things like that, like objects that already existed in Lua land in your application that you just wanted to give it types. Then you just give it interfaces and everything work. But what these folks here were trying to do, they were trying to build their own new object systems in Lua itself, in Teal itself. They wanted to do the inheritance. They wanted to do like, so for that, the interfaces were insufficient. But at the same time, we knew that interfaces, even as they were useful. Like when one of the reasons was, you saw this morning, if you were here, my Google Summer of Code student, Victor, who presented here, he did the porting of LuaRock's code base to Teal, and at one point he was using like Teal stable version, and he kept hitting issues with how to properly type some table relationships that I said like, okay, you really need those interfaces. So he switched to the in-development version of the compiler and started using interfaces, giving me feedback on how things were working or not, and eventually got it was one of the reasons that he got all the way through the port. And as I was adding interfaces, I keep like dogfooding all the time. I started like using the interfaces in the compiler itself, and it got like so much better, like catching things, because otherwise like before I had like two big types, like God types, like node, that's like all of the types of nodes of the AST, and another one called type, which is like every possible type with every possible attribute that a type has. And then I broke the type into a series of like a map type, an array type, so in that sense, like, okay, so now the compiler actually feels typed, because before, you're looking at type language, but you're basically only using two types all the time. So like I knew that it was useful in a sense, right? It was a step forward. But then what we hit there was this distinction between like, okay, so what do people want, right? Really. And what do I, the project author, want? Like when we're doing our small project and we're being happy, like, coding in our free time and doing stuff, right? So I tend to think about this like music, and in music, like you often hear like the standard advice that everyone says, like, oh, you may have to make the music that you yourself want to hear, like, and all of that. But like, I think that's not true in practice. Like, everybody makes music because they want to be heard, right? Like, because in the end, like, art is a form of communication, and I think like free software development is as well, right? Like if you write code and you put it out there, you want to have users, right? It's not like, I don't want to just, keep playing my guitar locked in my bedroom and nobody will ever hear it, and I don't want to write code that will never leave my own machine. So there's a balance to be struck, right? And if your goal is commercial, then you're going to just focus on what your paying customers want, which is not even what the majority wants. Like if you're like in an open core model or something like that. Like if your goal is like fame and for people to like you, then you just cater to what people want. But then you might just end up losing interest over time because it's not meaningful to you. So I think in the end, there's this thing about like going for, thinking about what you want and what people want. Like, so what I want is to have fun. I want to keep, merrily going my way coding. But I also want people to use it and to like it, right? So when going back to all those things that people talked about, like when I saw that people wanted nil safety, like what kept in my head was always like, okay, if I add nil safety, but then I added like the way TypeScript did it the first time around, and like, okay, now types can't be nil, but if you index an array, you get like an array of t, you get a t when you get out of that, but like you can index out of bounds and you could still get a nil. So the right thing to do would to return option nil, but then like people would have to to test on nil like every single time, and it would be like super annoying. Like, and then but then you cut that corner, but then it crashes. Like you end up in your head like having these conversations, and so in the end was like, what if I do it and it's not nil safe enough? Like if one little nil escapes and crashes people's code, and I promised them that it would be nil safe, right? And when people wanted objects, I knew that like in the Lua world there were like 7 different incompatible object models, and like if I gave them an object model, okay, here's a new keyword called class, and I'm gonna do the set meta tables or like automatically for you, and give you like a model that like does all of the wiring of inheritance and everything. Like, but what if people want a different model? Why do they say, okay, this is useless because it's not useful with like the object model that's already in my Lua game engine, and things like that, right? So I realized that I was always like escaping from those hard asks, like because of this game of like what if, right? In the end, this is like fear-driven design, right? It's like basically it was because I was afraid of like people's reactions, right? And sometimes I actually wanted to do those things myself, and then I thought like, okay, what if the reaction is negative, right? So a few lessons learned from the stuff that I did for Teal 24 was that like the success of the arity checks thing with the pragmas, and with like maybe someone like maybe the arity checks were problematic for people, but they found that there was a flag there, they disabled it, and they'd continue with their day and never bothered me with like an issue report, right? So for the nil safety thing, I could just think of all of those what ifs and make them like a separate pragma for each one of them, and let people like, okay, if they're unhappy with this part of it, they can disable it, right? So maybe like there's something that can be done there by adding it gradually, for example. And for objects, maybe users are not that opinionated, like, because I was already like inside my head like envisioning the flame wars that would happen because of the wrong object model being picked and all that. So an anecdote on that regard was like when I started LuaRocks, like it was the Wild West there was no package manager for Lua, so it was the Wild West in terms of like how Lua packages were installed. And so already people were opinionated because there were like 10 different ways of installing a Lua package, right? So the approach that I took with LuaRocks was to support all of them, right? Like, okay, now this is an extensible plugin-based system where like you can have various backends on how to build, and I was just trying to be nice to everybody. I wanted people to like me, right? And to like LuaRocks, and by extension like me, I guess. So, but in the end, like I realized that I didn't use any of them. So I made this like super silly, tiny auto-build bundle into LuaRocks, which I called the built-in mode. Like this is the build system if you don't have a build system. Last time I checked in the thousands and thousands of LuaRocks packages, like 80% of them use the built-in system. Like it has become the de facto standard way of packaging Lua modules, right? People just like, they just wanted one that worked, like most of the people, they were not in for like the flame wars. They just wanted something that worked. So so maybe, if you put something out there, and if it's useful for people, they will like it. If it's not, they will ignore it and just keep doing it manually the way they always did, right? So so that's what happened with LuaRocks. And one final thought in this regard was that like over time, in all those like years since 2019, the Lua landscape itself has evolved. Like we now have things like EmuLua, Lua language server, right? That you can put like through annotations and comments, like you get like ID auto-completion and like annotations for all of the types, and you get like a lot of what Teal gives you, right? So in the end, like, is there even a reason for Teal to exist in 2025, right? And like the operator was a bit of foreshadowing, because like that you cannot do with comments, right? So all of the tooling that exists around Lua, that you can do like linters and Lua check and comments and all of that, it's kind of like Super Mario Maker, right? Like it gives you like the tools, like the objects within like the way that the language works, the way Lua works. And it's like, okay, you can arrange Lua in all sorts of arbitrary ways and come up with new things, right? So this is kind of what you've been doing. But Teal can be like Super Mario Wonder, in which like we control the universe, so we can make it be anything we like, right? So like if this is too niche of a reference for you, like this is like Nintendo, like when they announced their latest like 2D Mario thing, people go like, what are they going to invent? Because like since Super Mario Maker, like the community has also invented all sorts of levels, right? So they basically invented levels that would be impossible to make in Super Mario Maker. Now Mario turns into a huge elephant and he goes into the background of the screen, and the world works in 2 layers, and it's really crazy. Like it's the craziest platformer I've ever played. So in Teal we can do that. We can like explore syntax and semantics beyond what Lua is, right? We can make dealing with types more ergonomic, because as soon as you start putting optional types, you need to have all sorts of little shortcuts so that you don't have to be writing like if x is nil like all the time, right? You can come up with all sorts of crazy things, and this is just a quick view. Like none of this exists, and I'm not promising any of those changes, but this is just like throwing ideas, to the wind of things that would be possible, right? And I'm going to skip, so I don't want you all to read all of that, but I know you're going to come back in the video and stop and look at each one of them. But I'm saying these are no promises, but the idea is just to keep experimenting, right? And one dilemma out of all of that remains, like, do people even want a minimalist language? Do I want a minimalist language? Because after all, like, the big thing about Lua is to be small and simple. But I created Teal because I wanted something else. So did I want a minimalist language? Like, I have to do a lot of soul searching about that as well. But the main difference is that, like, I see Lua as being for scripting, and I want Teal to be for like applications and libraries. And I think in the end, minimalism is about the conceptual budget, right? Does it fit in your head, right? So Lua is Lua, and Teal, I want it to be Lua-ish, and to me, being Lua-ish is like, have a tiny standard library. It's not like this, because if you look back like original Java, it is a tiny language with a huge standard library. Like you learn Java real fast, but then like the JVM world like overtakes you, right? Lua has like no dependencies.
If you answer questions, we need to switch.
You're right. So this is the last slides. No dependencies, fits in one head, right? So I'm going to keep experimenting. And the criteria is, does it make the compiler more fun to write? Does it make language more fun to use? Does it make the project more fun to carry, right? And I think this extends also to users who are going to be using the language. So instead of fear-driven design, let's go for fun-driven design. Thank you.
Awesome.